Barka was here but had left her voice in Delhi, he very kindly agreed to step in here. So, as you all know, Sunil has run the only show on Indian television for NDTV, the only show that focuses on books. And this has been running for the last 8 years without a break, every week. This is an incredible achievement in itself, and we're so happy, Sunil, that you agreed to jump in here. Over to you, and over to you, Nadeem.
Thank you very much, Shirish. It's my particular pleasure and indeed privilege to introduce a writer who I think is one of the most original voices to come to us in the late 20th, early 21st century, Nadeem Aslam, the British-Pakistani writer who's just out with his 4th novel. It's called The Blind Man's Garden. The first copies were delivered to the author and to reviewers and critics only yesterday by the Indian publisher Random House, which has specially rushed these copies across the Jaipur Literature Festival. So please give Nadeem a big hand. The Blind Man's Garden is your 4th novel, and like your last one, The Wasted Vigil, which came out 4.5 years ago, is also set in war-torn Afghanistan, part of it. What takes you back to Afghanistan in 2 of your most recent works?
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, first of all, and thank you, Sunil. We've lived through an extraordinary decade, beginning with 9/11 and ending with the Arab Spring. Muhammad Atta's suicide at one end, and Muhammad al-Bouazizi's suicide at the other end. Muhammad al-Bouazizi was, if you recall, that Tunisian fruit seller who set himself on fire in December 2010 and died the following month, and his death sparked off the Arab Spring. And between these 2 events, we've had the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, the war on terror, the call to jihad, Guantanamo Bay, Abu Ghraib, the assassination of Benazir Bhutto, the murder of Osama bin Laden, and a clash between an incomplete understanding of the East and an incomplete understanding of the West seems to have taken place. If you go to Google and type in Pakistan is, the 4 autofill choices you are given are evil, stupid, a terrorist country, dangerous. If you type in America is, the choices you are given are not the world, evil, not a country but a business. And I wanted to write to find a story. You say why return to Pakistan, to Afghanistan partly. I wanted to find a story which would encapsulate as many of these elements as possible without losing shape as a work of art, because first and foremost it's a novel, it's not a non-fiction book. Novelists don't tell you what to think, they tell you what to think about. So why return to it? I wanted the readers to sit down for a day and a half or over the course of a week to think about the things that we've been through.
The Wasted Vigil, set in Afghanistan, like much of your work, has a remarkable juxtaposition of intense beauty and poetry and almost terrifying, chilling brutality and bigotry. That's a recurring metaphor in much of your writing, the lyricism and yet the harshness. Yet the Wasted Vigil dealt with a whole bunch of characters, Russian, British, Afghans. Here you've moved deeper to your roots to explore the realities of contemporary Pakistan. Tell us, why is it called The Blind Man's Garden, and roughly what the story is about?
Okay. The book is called The Blind Man's Garden, and it is set in a fictional Pakistani town called Heer. And I'm sure most of the audience knows who Heer was, as in Heer Ranjha. And it's a town I have created. Why call it Heer? Because I wanted to connect myself to my land's folk legends. And from now on, all my novels will take place in this town called Heer. So with each new novel, the town would be better defined. It will have more feature.
What is most compelling about Waris Shah's legendary heroine to you?
Well,
of Heer Ranjha.
Well, it's rebellion. I mean, it's quite a simple story. Two lovers fall in love and they can't be together, and then at the end they die. But over the decades, over the centuries, this really rather simple tale has been imbued with with a great number of rebellious elements, as it were. When Udham Singh, who shot dead General Udair, whom he held responsible for the 1919 massacre in Amritsar, when he was on trial in London for killing General Udair, he had asked to take the oath on Waris Shah's heel. Not on the Bible, not on the Gita, not on the Quran. He said, I want to take the oath on Waris Shah. So again, the impulse was in me to celebrate these moments in my country's history, in my country's land. And so that was one of the reasons. And Amrita Pritam wrote about it, about how she saw the violence of partition through the Heer legend. That famous poem she wrote, possibly the most famous poem of the 20th, Punjabi poem of the 20th century.
I'm going to request you, like many people here, this extraordinary man is trilingual.
No.
English, painstakingly, is an acquired language to which he attains great new heights, but his original tongue is, of course, Urdu and Punjabi. He's as well acquainted with Waris Shah as with Amrita Pritam. Te pehle kuch sunao before you read from The Blind Man's Garden.
No, I think everyone knows the famous poem I'm talking about. Aj aakhan Waris Shah nu main kite kabran vichon bol te aj kitabe ishq da koi agla varga bhog. It's yes. Well, that's from Amrita Pritam, who was born in Gujranwala like me.
Born in Gujranwala like you.
Yeah.
Read a small passage from your new book.
I will read just the opening page. And I don't need to say anything to set it up, but I would, with your permission and if the audience allow me, I would like to explain why this part of the story is at the head of the novel. Afterwards. So I will read the first page, which is also the book's very short first chapter. History is the third parent. As Rohan makes his way through the garden, not long after nightfall, a memory comes to him from his son Gio's childhood, a memory that slows him and eventually brings him to a standstill. Ahead of him, candles are burning in various places at the house because there is no electricity. Wounds are set to emit light under certain conditions. Touch them and the brightness will stay on the hands. And as the candles burn, Rohan thinks of each flame as an injury somewhere in his house. One evening, as he was being told a story by Rohan, a troubled expression had appeared on Gio's face. Rohan had stopped speaking and gone up to him and lifted him into his arms, feeling the tremors in the small body. From dusk onwards, the boy tried to reassure himself that he would continue to exist after falling asleep, that he would emerge again into light on the other side. But that evening it was something else. After a few minutes, he revealed that his distress was caused by the appearance of the villain in the story he was being told. Rohan had given a small laugh to comfort him and asked, "But have you ever heard a story in which the evil person triumphs at the end?" The boy thought for a while before replying. "No," he said, "but before they lose, they harm the good people. That is what I'm afraid of."
Someone once called Nadeem Aslam the poet of dislocation. And it's a running metaphor in all his four remarkable novels, especially his masterpiece, Maps for Lost Lovers. In The Wasted Vigil, a central character, Marcus, who's English, lives in a house of perfumes in Afghanistan.
It's an abandoned perfume factory.
Abandoned perfume factory where the roof is covered with nailed books. Here, it's man going slowly blind in a garden. Among all this affliction, torment, conflict, you find these images, these sensory images of smell and sight, and how they're probably the only salvation for human beings.
Yes, my landscapes are always quite distinct, and I put a lot of work into them. So in this book, there is a garden, and the man is slowly, who is called Rohan, and his sons have left to go and help the wounded civilians in Afghanistan, and there something terrible happens, and he's waiting for news of them, basically, in the garden while he slowly goes blind. And those two boys were in love with the same woman, and she's waiting for him as well. And towards the end, when one of the lovers and the girl, Nahid, her name is, when they meet, she utters what for me is the key sentence of the novel. She says that I haven't seen you for 479 days. I feel as though I've been in 479 wars. So I wanted to bring the story of war into this landscape, just pull it down into this landscape and see what happens to the garden, as it were. And there is a lot of, character-wise, there is a deficiency in me when it comes to real life, in that it's not very easy for me to connect with other people, just by temperament, by character. I can't meet people and begin to talk to them immediately about intimate things. So when I knew that the character would go blind, I decided to go and talk to people who were visually impaired. But a year went by and I talked to any number of them, but I couldn't bring myself to ask them the questions that I wanted to ask. I thought maybe it would be too painful for them, maybe it's too personal. People will ask someone quite easily, if you have a scar, they will say, how did you get this scar? But I am quite anxious about even asking about that. I think maybe I'm stirring up a trauma. Maybe it's a bad memory here, I don't know. So a year went by and I didn't have the material about blindness. So I thought, let's do it ourselves. So for 1 week, the following year, I taped shut my eyes, and I lived like a blind man for 7 days, 24/7. And the things that I learned during that week of blindness went into the novel. The following year, I did it again. Then the following year, I did it again. The book took 4.5 years to write. So for 3 weeks, I was blind.
What did you learn?
Well, the first time I did it, after the end of that week, when I opened my eyes, I saw that standing in front of the mirror, I was covered in bruises. My face, my neck, my chest, my entire body was covered in bruises because I had been bumping into things during the previous week, and each of those accidents was leaving a mark, which I had totally forgotten about. So my body had a record of what had happened to me. But the things that I learned, like moments like one day my hand accidentally touched something warm, and my head flooded with the color red. And now Rohan says in the novel that when I'm blind and I want to think of the color red, I will touch something warm. And one day it was raining, so I made my way to the window and I put my hand out into the rain. And when the raindrops fell on the palm of my hand, the first image that came to me was the twinkling of stars. So that's what Naruhan says. And he says, and when I want to remember the twinkling of stars, I will put my hand out into the rain. So there were moments like this, and the first time I did it, I made so many mistakes. The second time there were fewer mistakes. And the third time, I was the smartest human being on the planet. I had prepared everything. I drove nails in front of the cooker in the floor, so I knew where to rest my feet, so I could cook without setting myself on fire. And you learn that the soles of your feet are incredibly sensitive. They are, absolutely. Eventually, I could tell the difference between tiles and carpet, between grass and mud. So, but I mean, I've segued into talking about this, but none of this is important to the reader, because if I did all this research, but I did something clumsy with it in the novel, then it wouldn't matter. The point is to get that material and then make it into art, to present it to the reader, so that it really shouldn't matter whether I was blind or whether I was sighted and what have you.
What is unique about Nadeem Aslam's art is this deep intensity and this sense of feeling, this ability to recreate senses that we take for granted: color, sight, fragrance, touch. And you have to read the beauty of his prose, particularly in Maps for Lost Lovers, to see what I mean. But the other unique aspect of Nadeem Aslam's life is that it's not a very easy life to explain, because it's a life that he's largely kept hidden, because it's a life of intense hardship and privation. When Nadeem was 14, his father, who was a political figure in the town of Gujranwala in Pakistan, had to leave the country as a political exile. Until then, Nadeem had only been to the local school, which was Urdu medium, and he was transposed almost overnight into the cold, bleak, isolated landscape of an English village in Yorkshire. He went to school, to the local school, and he had no English.
Well, yes, I mean, and in England, a child has to be in school until he or she is 16. So I went to school and I had my English was quite basic. It's, this is a cat, this is a table. And I was 14, because I don't come from an affluent background, which meant that I couldn't go to the English medium schools, the fee-paying schools. So when I went to England, the subjects I did well at school were sciences, because for sciences your English needn't be that good. You need to learn facts and then present them, even if they are in a tutti-putti language. So I went to university to do sciences. But in my third year, I realized by that time I'd been in England for, I think, 6 or 7 years, that my English was good enough to now do what I really wanted to do, which was to write. And so I didn't finish my degree, I dropped out.
And that triggered off a period of very great hardship for you.
Well, it's...
How to learn this language in a completely alien landscape?
First of all, I will take issue with the fact that the landscape of England is bleak. I'm enough of an Englishman now to say that,
But you weren't there.
I did write a novel in which...
Yes, I mean, it is a landscape of great isolation. In fact, your village in Yorkshire in Maps for Lost Lovers is called... It has no name. It's called Dasht-e Tanhai, the desert of solitude, of loneliness.
Well, that's the...
That's pretty bleak.
That's the...
Be honest.
No, but that's the immigrants who have given it
Which
that
you were
name.
one.
Yes, absolutely. But also, it's...
Anyway, it was a period of intense hardship.
Yeah, so I wrote my novel, my first novel, which took 11 months to write. And I did...
He worked as a laborer.
Yes.
He worked in bars. Then it is true you did hard work, saved up a few pennies, and you pretty much locked yourself up, didn't you?
Well, yes, I mean, because money was hard to come by, I don't mean to frighten any young writer, any young person here who wants to be a writer. You know, they will think that it's hard, because an artist is never poor. You must remember this. So they were, well, but there was that physical thing in that I needed to keep that room warm. If it was cold, I needed a warm room to sit down and make my art. So the logistics of it were, you are absolutely right. So I would work for 2 or 3 months and on building sites, in pubs, in cinemas and what have you. I worked as a bin man, which is collecting rubbish from people's houses. And then I would save as much of that money, and for the next 3 months, I would sit down and write, and I wouldn't go out.
And in fact,
so
sit down in libraries and read to understand the language.
Well, that is what I'm saying. That is what I'm saying. So my first novel, when I dropped out, it took 11 months to write.
That's Season of the Rainbow.
Season of the Rainbow. And I didn't know how to have a book published. I had no idea. So the writers I loved were John Updike, Gore Vidal, V.S. Naipaul, who were published by a firm in England called Andre Deutsch. So I picked up a copy of A Bend in the River, V.S. Naipaul's novel, looked at the copyright page, and got the address of Andre Deutsch from that, and sent them the manuscript. And I think it was 10 days later that I got a phone call from an editor saying, my name is Esther Whitby, and I edited A Bend in the River, and we have your novel, and come and have lunch with me. I said, I can't come and have lunch with you. And she said, why not? I said, I have no money. And she said, we'll give you money. Come and have lunch. So I went and had lunch, and they said, we will publish this, now go and write the second novel. And I thought that now I need to do what I couldn't do in real life, which was that now I need to do my O-levels in English. Now I need to do my A-levels, my university BA, my MA, my PhD in English. So over the next 11 years, I read everything by D.H. Lawrence, everything by Conrad, everything by Nabokov, everything by William Faulkner, everything by Joyce. So I was teaching myself. So those 10 years were the years of my education. As it
They were the hardest years of your apprenticeship in a way.
They were, yes. Those things would have happened in any case. Had I been born in England, or had I stayed in Pakistan, and you know, then I would have written in Urdu, of course, because then I would have gone to a Pakistani university to read Urdu literature, to read the history of the subcontinent, etc., but in another language. So yes, to answer your question,
11 years of a great slog of learning, of discipline, of hardship. You once said to me that, you know, there comes a time when you can eat one free meal of a friend, then you can eat 1,000, but then the 1,001 first meal, free meal, you morally feel revolted. Later your friend said, you fool, why didn't you just ask us for more food? But you can't, and he would literally go without food, this is a fact, and he would not read newspapers, he would cover the rooms, the windows of his rooms with black cloth, no TV, shut himself up for 2 months to just write Maps for Lost Lovers, which took 11 years to complete. He lived like a hermit. And it is one of the most evocative studies of immigrant life. Sikh, Hindu, Muslim, what happens? What are the degrees and intensities of alienation? Understandings of piety, differences, closenesses, and yet, very excitingly, it's set as a thriller. And the beauty of the language of the English prose is intense. Maps for Lost Lovers, which has never stopped being a great seller and has won so many prizes. It put you on the world map. What did it do for you? Did it change your life?
Did it change my life? How did I feel when...
It became this cult book?
Well, people talk about, and you've mentioned it, the language, as it were. But I sometimes feel that I'm doing something private, because I think, at the risk of sounding ungrateful, a writer doesn't even have need for publication, because what you're doing in your study, that is the important thing. And however long it takes and however long you're trying to understand, I always say that I'm never, and then people talk about the nowness of my book, my books, how they are connected to the times and the politics of our time, how they're commenting on the war on terror, the Blind Man's Garden comments on jihad and war on terror. But I always say that I am not trying to connect with anyone. That my writing is an exploration of my own life, my own place in this world. But the books do seem to connect with people. I get letters, people talk to me. And I think it happens because I always begin with the conviction, and I think it is my deepest conviction, that there is nothing extraordinary about me, that I am just one human being among 6 billion other people on this planet. So if I'm trying to explore my life from that position, in that we are all on the same level, so if something is true of me, there's every likelihood that it's true of you as well, and you as well, and you as well. But if I begin from an elevated position, thinking I'm feeling these things are happening to me because I am so great, that something is unique about me, then the reader would feel alienated, because you're really not connecting with the reader, or the issues that you have decided to explore are really not universal. They are quite unique in that your own circumstance. This is quite an anti-modern thing, because modernity has taught us that you yourself are at the center of everything else, and everything else is secondary. With me, I always begin with someone else. I am someone's son. I'm someone's friend. I'm someone's neighbor. I'm someone's nephew. I'm someone's uncle. So that is the impulse behind it, and that makes the modern mind very uncomfortable.
I'm going to come to how you formulate your superb portraits in all these roles, but it strikes me that one of the recurring themes is forbidden love in Maps for Lost Lovers, and all of us, that's how his books connect to everybody and are so universal. Each one of us has either suffered from a lost love, a clandestine love, unrequited love in the eyes of society, in our partner's eyes. And at the center of Maps for Lost Lovers, of course, are Jugnu and Chanda, this couple who've mysteriously disappeared. Some days later, Chanda's brothers are arrested. That gives it the excitement of a thriller. What happens to the community, their relatives, their neighbors? Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh is... And now, the other metaphor that Nadeem has mentioned, setting his stories, Blind Man's Garden and all novels to come, in a town called Heer. Again, one of the great love stories of the subcontinent, of lost and forbidden love. My question to you is, this minds or harks back to so much in Urdu poetry.
Indeed, it does. Indeed, yes. Yes, well, yes.
Forbidden love, and yet
The quest for the beloved.
The quest of the beloved.
The quest
Shama,
for the beloved.
Parvana, they're in
Bhamra and
Bhavra, you know, and yet the underlying violence and retribution.
Well, I mean,
You look at Ghalib, Faiz, the great
well, the quest for
Sufi
the
poetry.
absolutely. The quest for the beloved is one of the central themes of Islamic poetry, actually, and from which Urdu draws its traditions. And again, in The Blind Man's Garden, there is the forbidden love of. I haven't said anything about the plot of the novel. So these two boys who are in love with the same girl, and something terrible happens to one of them in Afghanistan, and the other one now has to make his way back. And so that actually plays into what you were saying
And
earlier.
also visually, I keep thinking of the incredible images of nature. They're like the cypress tree,
With the dove and the cypress tree.
the
Yeah,
dove
well,
and the
the-
cypress, the ideal of paradise
Absolutely.
as a garden. And the garden image recurs again and again.
I shall read something from the garden.
Brilliant.
So deeper in, so Rohan is going blind in the blind man's garden, and he's trying to remember everything that the garden has. And his wife used to be a painter, and she would paint. And in certain Islamist minds, painting of a living thing is a sin. So this is a sin, you know. So while she was dying, Rohan had burnt all her paintings because he didn't want her to burn in hell for the sin of having created the paintings. He was saving her, as it were. And she was in pain because as she lay dying, the smoke of her burnt paintings was entering the bedroom and hovering above her bed. And he was saying, tell me where all the other paintings are, tell me where all the other paintings are. And now he himself is going blind. So, and now he's trying to remember them, remember everything. So he's in a way painting these pictures in his own mind, and he's trying to look at the garden in a very, very specific way. Preparing himself for blindness, he commits everything to memory as she committed everything to paper, painting the garden's flowers and birds onto his mind. And for several years after she was gone, the garden looked as though something important had befallen it. The limes and the acacia trees seemed to mourn her, the rosewood and the Persian lilacs, the peepal and the corals, and all their different fruits, berries, and spores. The seeds tough as cricket balls or light enough to remain afloat for half an hour. Inside the earth, the roots mourned her even without having seen her, and the white teak whose bark came off in plates the size of footprints. The lemon tree that produced 25 baskets of fruit each year. He was sure that all of them, as well as the lightning-fast lizards of the garden, were mourning her with him, and the stiffly rustling dragonflies, and the blue-winged carpenter bees, and the black chain of the ants, and the tough carapaced beetles, and the various snails. In grief, he had whispered her name as he walked the red paths set loose in the garden, and the word had gone among the glistening black brilliance of the crows, and the butterflies floating in the sunlight, the Himalayan piaro, the chitrali satyr, the blue tigers, and the common leopard, and the swallowtails, and the peacocks. She had loved them and the world in which they existed, saying, God is just a name for our wonder. There was no soul, only consciousness, no divine plan, only nature. and we were simply among the innumerable results of its randomness. She said, "I will miss this because this is all there is," her last words, and then she had slipped out of his life, consigning him to decades of apprehension on her behalf, because he knew that the soul existed, and not only that, it was accountable to Allah and his providential rage. Unlike her, he knew that the dead were not beyond harm. So,
there's a lovely phrase there, that we are all the result of what happens to us as a result of the randomness, the randomness of life. And
well, in the secular mind, because in the religious mind, one of the great things about going to Pakistan for me is that God is not dead in Pakistan, you know, and he has a say. He has a say in everyday affairs, you know, and
sometimes unjustly.
Sometimes and that can lead to a whole spectrum of behavior. You know, some are good, some are bad, and the attempt in The Blind Man's Garden was to explore as much of that as possible.
Both the evil and the good.
Absolutely. When the book was finished and the manuscript sent off to the various publishers, and I got their comments back from around the world, and of course they mentioned everything that you've just been mentioning, and people always mention in relation to my work, which is the language, the story, but one thing they all mentioned was humanity, the humanity of the characters. So much so that after, I think, the 20th letter, I began to wonder. I said, I remember working on the language of the novel, I remember working on the narrative, I remember working on politics and history. What is this thing called humanity they keep talking about? I don't remember working on this. And of course what they were talking about was that people were looking after each other, that they were going out of their way to save the other person. I always say that we can't save ourselves, only each other. I will save you, and hopefully someone will save me, and someone will. So that is how it works. So in the novel, towards the end, I can't obviously give anything away. Towards the end, there is a trial through which my hero, Mikhail, has to go through. And the reader the other day said to me, so in a way, it is a possibility that he could let her down again, Naheed, in that he should be with her, but he's gone on to save someone else, as it were. And while it is easy that he could have abandoned this person in the desert and gone back to the woman he loves. And I said that if you read the book carefully, and if you know Naheed towards the end of the novel, you know her well enough, you know that she would be disappointed if he did that. So then he would let her down if he abandoned that person in the desert. You know, so that was the attempt. So I think that was the humanity people were talking about.
Humanity, compassion, reaching out, connecting, saving lives.
And all of that.
But then, this goes hand in hand with frightful social and political injustice, incited violence, hatred, very often in the name of God. And many of your books are suffused with those themes of religious intolerance, bigotry,
nationalism.
And you're here in India today as British Pakistani, tensions simmering, some would say rising again between the two countries. We seem to be locked in an eternal cycle of one step forward, two steps backwards. Where does humanity come in?
Well, first of all,
we're not saving one another.
Well, yes, we are. These are politicians, and maybe I am the wrong person to be answering that question.
I think you're the right person, Nadeem.
Well, no. You see, for me, borders and frontiers don't mean anything. I could live anywhere if I loved someone. So country doesn't mean anything to me. So the land doesn't mean anything to me.
It's what Ian Foster said. if you had a choice between betraying your country and betraying your friend, the correct answer, the correct choice is, of course you must betray your country because friends are beyond frontiers and you can never regain a friend again. You can regain a country.
Yeah, and you were talking about the ugliness of the times across the globe, frankly, not just in any specific areas. And on the second page of the novel, we have this line.
That's a very good omen.
Is it? Okay. The logic is that there are no innocent people in a guilty nation. So if Pakistan, so if the Pakistani government does something, and so America feels, the American government feels it can hold the entire nation, the entire Pakistani nation responsible for it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And just across the globe, I mean, I'm sure you've heard that daily massacres are taking place, more or less, in Waziristan, in the tribal areas of Pakistan. And the latest figures we have is the latest figures I know, which came out in September 2012, are that in the so-called strategic attacks, these well-chosen targets, 49 innocent people are dying for one militant that is taken out. So basically, the figure is 2%. So in order to kill 2 militants, the American drones are killing 98 ordinary people. I wonder if you remember last year, this young African-American child, this 16-year-old boy, called Trayvon Martin, was shot dead in Miami on suspicion of being a burglar. He was in a neighborhood and the guard thought he was a burglar, so he shot him and he died. And of course, I was deeply upset about the whole thing, as any right-thinking human being would be. And this is not to take anything away from Trayvon Martin's death. President Obama went on TV and said, the fact of the matter is that if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon Martin. We need to think about these things. Well, with due respect to President Obama, if I had a son, he would look like one of those 98 people who are dying over there in these so-called strategic attacks. And on a good day, on suspicion of being a terrorist, on a bad day, they are collateral damage. They don't even count. And we can't just hold the Americans responsible. We have to hold the Pakistani government responsible as well. In Bob Woodward's book, The Obama Wars, I think it's called, in that book, we are told that the Director General of the CIA went to President Zardari, and President Zardari said to him, kill the militants, collateral damage bothers you, it doesn't bother me. So these are the facts. So as I said, I am not on anyone's side. I am on the side of these human beings.
Very quick last question. We have to wrap up. Can writers change the world? Can they alter the ways of our rulers?
Well, writing is all I can do, okay? And I think that despair has to be earned. I can't complain emptily and say the world is a mess, and without having first tried to change it. As a human being, this is my temperament, that the only thing I can do is this. So this is what I'm trying to do. You were talking about poetry. There's a great poem by Czeslaw Milosz about Osip Mandelstam, who say that...
Please recite it.
You who wronged a simple man, bursting into laughter at a crime, kept a pack of fools around you, to mix good with evil, to blur the line. Do not feel safe, the poet remembers. You can kill one, but another is born. The words are written down, the deed, the date. So that is the attempt in my novels, that to keep some kind of a record.
Nadeem Aslam, a great joy, a pleasure, an honor to have you at the Jaipur Literature Festival. Hope you'll come back again and again to India, and all the very best for the Blind Man's Garden. Thank you so much. Please give him a big hand.
And please also a big hand for Sunil. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Thank you to you both.